A $500 million Saudi offer just detonated inside women's tennis, and Alexandra Ayah is standing at the center of the explosion. Records shattered, billions evaporated, and the WTA, scrambling behind closed doors, suddenly realized the one player they underestimated had become the one asset they cannot afford to surrender. Nobody predicted a 20-year-old from the Philippines would become the instrument that dismantles professional tennis's entire commercial architecture. But here we are, and what happened next changed everything, permanently. Stay until the final chapter, because the truth buried inside this story will leave your jaw on the floor. There is a particular kind of blindness that infects powerful institutions. Not ignorance, something far more dangerous. Arrogance. The unshakable certainty that the future will arrive on their terms, through their chosen vehicles, at their preferred pace. The WTA suffered precisely that affliction when Alexandra Eala began her ascent, and by the time they opened their eyes, she had already outgrown every container they had prepared for her. Understand the foundation first. Alexandra Ayah was born on May 23, 2005 in Quezon City, Philippines, a nation of 115 million people with no established tennis infrastructure, no Grand Slam tradition, and no historical expectation that one of their own would ever pierce the upper echelon of professional women's sport. She arrived at Rafael Nadal's academy in Manacor at 13 years old, a child carrying ambitions so outsized they seemed almost delusional against the backdrop of where she came from. She graduated from that academy in 2023, and then she began erasing history. In March 2025, ranked 140th globally and armed with nothing but a wild-card invitation to the Miami Open, Ayala did something that redefined the term breakthrough. She eliminated Madison Keys, she demolished Iga Swiatek, the world's second-ranked player, 6-2, 7-5. She reached the semifinals of a WTA 1000 event without anyone having genuinely prepared for her existence at that altitude. The Philippines fractured with collective ecstasy. Matches broadcast across time zones, fans materializing at practice courts, signing autograph queues that stretched beyond any marshal's ability to contain. Sports journalist Diane Castillo captured the national mood with devastating precision. Ayala was already being treated, she wrote, like a multiple Grand Slam winner before she had captured a single WTA Tour title. Sky Sports presenter Gigi Salmon put it even starkly during a London tennis event. In terms of her appeal, the crowds that follow her, she might already be the biggest star. Not the most decorated, not the highest ranked, the biggest. The one whose presence alone restructures an entire tournament's atmosphere and ticket demand. By March 2026, she had reached a career high ranking of world number 29. She had secured Nike, Babolat, Globe Telecom, Bank of the Philippine Islands, Locally Juice, and Milo as commercial partners. Multiple A-list corporations were privately circling her management team, industry insiders describing the comparisons flooding executive boardrooms. Emma Raducanu, after her 2021 U.S. Open miracle, multiplied by a fan base spanning 3 of the world's fastest-growing economies. Analysts examining her commercial footprint weren't calculating what she was worth inside the WTA ecosystem, they were calculating what she was worth outside it. And somewhere in Riyadh, someone inside Saudi Arabia's public investment fund, the $925 billion sovereign wealth machine already rewriting the laws of global sport, reached a conclusion that would ignite the most consequential crisis in women's tennis history. They wanted her. All of her. Exclusively. Before we go further, understand what Saudi Arabia already controls inside the sport, because what you're about to hear isn't speculation, it's a documented seizure of power that was hiding in plain sight the entire time. To grasp the magnitude of a $500 million offer directed at one 20-year-old tennis player, you must first comprehend the scope of what Saudi Arabia's public investment fund had already consumed before Ayala's name appeared on their target list. The evidence sits in public record, announced with institutional press releases and celebrated by the very organizations now trembling at the consequences of their own appetites. In 2024, Saudi Arabia's PIF became the official naming rights sponsor of the PIF Waist Rankings, the very instrument used to measure every player's standing in professional women's tennis. The WTA finals relocated to Riyadh for 3 consecutive years, 2024, 2025, and 2026. Total prize money for the 2025 edition reached a record $15.5 million, guaranteed to escalate further in subsequent editions. WTA Ventures, the commercial arm established through a 2023 partnership with CVC Capital Partners, announced a staggering 24% revenue increase in its inaugural full operational year, a significant portion of that growth directly attributable to Saudi funding. Marina Storti, CEO of WTA Ventures, declared the organization's ambition without equivocation. Our aim is to make women's tennis a commercial powerhouse. The WTA's own statements acknowledged that Saudi investment was accelerating the goal of tripling commercial revenue between 2023 and 2029. Rafael Nadal himself had signed a reported $750 million ambassador agreement with the Saudi Tennis Federation. Carlos Alcaraz traveled to Riyadh. Janni Sinner traveled. Taylor Fritz traveled. Fritz didn't even bother constructing a sophisticated justification. He loved to show me a tournament where you can go play 3 matches and potentially make $6 million. The takeover, as one prominent analyst phrased it, was substantially complete, revealed piece by piece as each new acquisition receives confirmation. PIF's fingerprints covered every surface of professional tennis. The rankings carried their name. The season finale bore their flag. The most celebrated male champion on earth served as their ambassador. What remained? What single commercial territory had Saudi Arabia's sovereign capital not yet absorbed? The one demographic that the WTA's own growth projections identified as their most critical untapped reservoir: Southeast Asia, specifically the Philippines, specifically the 115 million person audience that had no historical tennis attachment until a 20-year-old from Quezon City began dismantling world-ranked opponents on international broadcasts. Ayala represented not merely a player, she constituted an entire undeveloped continent of commercial possibility, and the entity with the financial architecture to unlock that possibility at maximum velocity, a $925 billion sovereign wealth fund, recognized it before the WTA's own executives processed what they were witnessing. The offer that emerged from Riyadh wasn't a sponsorship package. It wasn't an ambassador arrangement. It was a structural realignment, a $500 million proposition spanning a decade constructed to extract Ayala's commercial identity from the WTA ecosystem entirely and anchor it inside Saudi Arabia's expanding tennis empire. $500 million, a number so staggering it broke every precedent the sport possessed for female athlete valuation. And when the WTA finally understood what was on the table, their entire Southeast Asian growth strategy walked out the door with the player carrying it. The panic was instantaneous. Picture what that number represents in context. Ayala's career prize money as of early 2026 stood at approximately $1.49 million. Her entire professional earnings across years of competition didn't constitute a fraction of a single percentage point of the Saudi proposal now sitting before her management team. That gulf between what the existing system had delivered and what an external power now offered crystallized everything wrong with women's tennis's commercial infrastructure in a single searing comparison. The WTA had celebrated its record $249 million total prize pool in 2025,
A genuine achievement, a 13% improvement, meaningful progress toward parity with the men's tour. But those numbers described the entire tour's compensation across hundreds of players and dozens of tournaments over 12 months. Saudi Arabia was proposing $500 million for one person over 10 years. The arithmetic wasn't complicated. It was catastrophic for every argument the WTA had constructed about why female athletes needed to remain inside their ecosystem to maximize commercial value. The ramifications cascaded beyond money with breathtaking speed. Ayla wasn't simply the Philippines' greatest sporting export. She was, as WTA internal projections reportedly identified, the most organically viral female tennis presence since Raducanu's 2021 explosion, with a critical distinction. Raducanu's appeal, however global, operated within established commercial territories. Ayla's fan base occupied geography the WTA had never successfully penetrated. Every Philippine television network broadcasting her matches, every Filipino community across the Middle East filling Abu Dhabi stadiums to capacity, every Japanese, Chinese, and Southeast Asian market where her story resonated as something beyond tennis, as national mythology in motion. I am immensely grateful for the people who continuously show up for me, Ayla had said after fans swarmed the Qatar Open, despite her first-round departure, signing autographs and granting photographs with the patience of someone who understood that every interaction carried weight beyond the personal. Those people, those crowds materializing at every tournament, regardless of draw position or seeding, represented billions in untapped broadcast rights, merchandise revenue, and sponsorship premiums that the WTA had not yet extracted. If she departed, they departed with her, not metaphorically, literally. The commercial value of Southeast Asian market penetration, the territory WTA Ventures had identified as essential to achieving its goal of tripling revenue by 2029, walked out the door the moment Ayla signed anything bearing a Saudi letterhead. Internal WTA discussions, according to sources familiar with the deliberations, described the scenario in terms that had never previously been applied to a single player outside the top 5 in global rankings. Existential. Not damaging, not unfortunate. Existential. A 20-year-old who hadn't yet won a WTA tour title held the financial survival of an institution inside her decision. Stay right here, because what happened inside Ayla's camp when Saudi Arabia's proposal landed and how the WTA responded when they discovered it reveals something about the sport that nobody at the top wants admitted publicly. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the WTA's panic inadvertently exposed. Everything Saudi Arabia was now offering Ayla, infrastructure investment, commercial amplification, financial valuation commensurate with actual market impact, was precisely what the WTA itself had claimed to pursue when it accepted Saudi money to host the finals in Riyadh, when it allowed PIF to brand its rankings, when it quietly celebrated a 24% revenue surge driven substantially by Gulf capital. The WTA had embraced Saudi investment as a mechanism to elevate the sport's commercial standing. It had justified that partnership through the language of player empowerment, prize money growth, and global expansion. Storti herself had framed it as a mission to fuel reinvestment in the sport and help the WTA keep championing our amazing athletes. Now, those same athletes, the most commercially valuable among them, were receiving direct approaches from the same Gulf capital the WTA had invited inside its house. The hypocrisy was structural, not accidental, and Ayla's situation illuminated it with a clarity that no institutional spokesperson could obscure. If Saudi investment was ethical enough to rename the WTA Rankings, host the season's most prestigious finale, and fund record prize money distributions, why was it suddenly threatening when directed at an individual player's empowerment rather than the organization's revenue? What principle distinguished acceptable Gulf capital from unacceptable Gulf capital? The answer, stripped from institutional language, was territorial. The WTA wanted Saudi Arabia's money flowing through its own channels, amplifying its own brand, serving its own commercial architecture. The moment that same capital threatened to bypass the organization entirely, to deal directly with the asset rather than the institution claiming ownership of that asset, the framing shifted from partnership to crisis. Tennis fans on social media registered the contradiction instantaneously. One widely circulated reaction captured the consensus with surgical precision. The WTA couldn't simultaneously argue that Saudi investment transformed women's tennis into a commercial powerhouse and then condemn the logical conclusion of that argument, Saudi Arabia pursuing the sport's most commercially significant individual directly. The position was philosophically untenable, and Ayla's camp understood that with perfect clarity. She had trained since 13 under Rafael Nadal's philosophy, a mentor who himself had navigated Saudi partnerships, academy sale controversies, and institutional criticism with characteristic composure. "I accept the critics," Nadal had said of his own Gulf arrangements, especially those who criticize while respecting other people. That framework, principled engagement without defensive capitulation, had shaped Ayla's professional identity as fundamentally as his technical coaching shaped her backhand. She wasn't naive about the political dimensions. She wasn't indifferent to scrutiny. But she was 20 years old, ranked 29th in the world, and holding a proposal that valued her commercial identity at a figure the WTA's entire prize pool couldn't match in 2 years combined. The question her camp asked, the question nobody at the WTA could answer satisfactorily, was devastatingly simple. Why should she accept institutional valuation of her worth when the market had just revealed something categorically different?
Strip the drama temporarily. Examine the architecture of what a $500 million decade-long commitment to Alexandra Ayala would actually construct, because the implications extend far beyond one player's bank balance. Saudi Arabia's sports investment thesis has never been purely athletic. Every acquisition, Live Golf, the Premier League's Newcastle United, ATP and WTA partnerships, Nadal's ambassador arrangement, the next-gen finals in Jeddah, operates within a coherent strategic framework. Purchase cultural legitimacy through sporting excellence, then leverage that legitimacy to transform Saudi Arabia's global perception and domestic social development simultaneously. Ayala fits that framework with the precision that no other available tennis asset matches. She is young, 20 years old, a decade of peak competitive years ahead. She is ethnically Southeast Asian, connecting to demographics Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program specifically identifies as strategic relationship priorities. She is female, providing the visibility that Saudi officials have increasingly demanded as evidence of social modernization within the kingdom. She is an authentic underdog story, not manufactured celebrity, but documented excellence built through years of sacrifice on Majorcan clay courts. And critically, she is already beloved. Genuinely, organically, historically beloved. Filipino sports journalist comparisons to Manny Pacquiao weren't hyperbole, they were demographic reality. Pacquiao didn't just win fights, he constituted a national spiritual event. Ayala's trajectory carried identical energy. A $500 million investment in that trajectory doesn't purchase a tennis player, it purchases a geopolitical instrument, a bridge between Saudi Arabia's sovereign ambitions and 115 million Filipinos, plus diaspora communities across the Middle East, Japan, North America, and Europe, who follow her every match regardless of time zone obstacles. For the WTA, the mathematics were catastrophic regardless of Ayala's ultimate decision. If she accepted, they lost Southeast Asia's commercial future to an external power. If she rejected, Saudi Arabia understood she represented a vulnerability, and they would pursue the next highest value target with identical methodology. The $500 million figure had already accomplished its primary strategic function before a single document received a signature.
It had demonstrated, publicly and irrefutably, that the WTA's most valuable commercial asset operated in a market that valued her far beyond what the organization's own structure had ever acknowledged. That revelation, that gap between institutional valuation and genuine market worth, threatened to trigger demands from every other undervalued player in the tour's roster. If Ayala was worth $500 million to an external bidder, what were Ariana Sabalenka's commercial rights genuinely worth? What about Coco Gauff? What about the next Ayala, waiting in some academy somewhere, watching this negotiation with careful attention? The WTA hadn't just encountered a bidding contest for one player, they had stumbled into an existential audit of their entire commercial model. Return to that practice court in Manacor, November 19, 2025, exactly 1 year after Rafael Nadal's final professional match at the Davis Cup Finals. He returned to the tennis court for the first time, practicing with Ayala. She described him as being back like he never left. He posted simply, "1 year later, it felt great to be back." Two left-handed players, a shared court, and between them, something that transcended the commercial war raging around them both. Ayala had once told a Philippine broadcaster that Nadal's most admirable quality wasn't his 22 Grand Slam titles, wasn't his revolutionary clay court dominance, wasn't his extraordinary physical resilience through chronic injury. It was something simpler and rarer. The fact that he is still so nice to everyone around him. Grounded, human, present. That description of a legend defined by decency rather than dominance tells you everything about the values Ayala carries into the most consequential professional decision of her career. She has expressed what tennis means to her through actions, not declarations. She cried at Eastbourne after her first WTA final, speaking of historic firsts for the Philippines. It's the first time any Filipina has done anything, and I guess that's also why I'm so emotional. She signed autographs at Qatar after a first-round defeat, gratitude undimmed by disappointment. She ghosted Nadal's congratulatory message for 4 days during Miami because she was too locked into competition to check her phone, and then apologized to a 22-time Grand Slam champion with the sincerity of someone who genuinely, deeply cared. This is who Saudi Arabia wants to anchor their tennis expansion. This is who the WTA cannot afford to surrender. And this is who, at 20 years old, ranked 29th in the world, ascending rapidly toward a ceiling nobody has yet identified, holds more institutional leverage than any player in women's tennis history who wasn't simultaneously holding a Grand Slam trophy. The WTA built its global expansion argument around finding the next transformative figure who could open untapped territories and convert casual observers to devoted audiences. They found her. She trained at someone else's academy, developed under someone else's mentorship, and became globally recognizable before the organization fully processed what they possessed. Now, an external power has quantified her worth at a number that exposes every underinvestment, every structural inequity, every moment the WTA's commercial machinery failed to recognize what was materializing in front of their eyes. Saudi Arabia's $500 million offer didn't break tennis records accidentally. It broke them as a statement, a deliberate, calculated declaration that the sport's governing institutions had consistently mispriced their most valuable human assets, and that entities with sufficient capital and strategic clarity were prepared to correct that error at historical scale. The question that remains, the one nobody inside boardrooms or broadcasting studios will answer directly, is this. If the WTA had valued Alexandra Ayala at what the market just proved she's worth, would Saudi Arabia have ever needed to make this offer in the first place? Drop your answer below, because that question doesn't have a comfortable response, and the sport needs to sit inside that discomfort until something actually changes. This negotiation, regardless of its resolution, permanently altered professional women's tennis. No future player, no future commercial partnership, no future institutional argument about player valuation will proceed without the shadow of this number falling across every conversation. $500 million directed at a 20-year-old Filipina who was ranked 140th 18 months prior. That trajectory, that acceleration, that market recognition arriving years ahead of institutional acknowledgement. Alexandra Ayala didn't just become tennis's most fascinating commercial story, she became the proof that the sport's governing bodies had been measuring value with instruments calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And whatever she decides, the WTA, Saudi Arabia, and every player watching this unfold will spend the next decade living with the consequences. If this story cracked open something you've never heard discussed anywhere else, you already know what to do. Smash that subscribe button. We dig into every hidden controversy, every suppressed negotiation, every moment where the sports political machinery collides with human ambition. New content drops weekly. The next story is already more explosive than this one. Don't miss it.